So like I said, see, you've become the first person from the Philippines to win a Nobel Peace Prize. So what does this mean to your country? You know, a journalist winning would usually indicate that something's wrong in that place. So what does this mean to you? What does it mean to the country and to journalists overall?
Well, for us, it's been a very tough few years since 2016. And I've had, 10 arrest warrants in less than 2 years. I've fought cases in court. We've fought getting shut down. Rappler has those same 10 cases. It was incredible to realize that we weren't alone. And for that, I profusely thanked the Nobel Committee. It was a shot in the arm, not just for me, but for all Filipino journalists. Rapplers were, overjoyed because it is difficult to keep doing what we're doing. But I think that one of the things it accomplished in the Philippines was it united Filipino journalists, because everyone has different risk appetite. And some people were quiet, some people were not, right? We had no choice. I had no choice. And it united all of us. And then beyond that, outside, right? This was an acknowledgement, I think, globally for all journalists, how difficult it has been to do our jobs, to hold power to account. And I looked at it, the last time a journalist had been given the prize was in 1936. And he languished in a Nazi concentration camp. So this is part of what I realized. The Nobel Committee looked at the world, and I think they're saying we're at the precipice of something like 1936, right? What happened after that? World War II. And then after World War II, the world came together to create a new world, to prevent the worst of human nature from ruling us. And that's, I think, the moment we're living in. I think the last thing I'll say is, how did our government react? Dmitry and I had similar experiences. His government reacted quicker than mine. The Kremlin and Putin congratulated him, had some nice words for him the first day until Putin then threatened him, right? But in my case, what the government did was radio silence. I guess stunned silence, as stunned as I was. So silence Friday, Saturday, Sunday. On Monday, we had kind of like a strange statement where it kind of goes against your question, which the government said, we congratulate Maria Ressa, the first Filipino to win the Nobel Prize. It proves press freedom exists in the Philippines, and
that was 3 days later, and then they say that press freedom exists in the Philippines. That's quite ironic. But you said in an interview that you're an idealistic, right? So most journalists are when they start out. But despite the threats and court cases against you and Rappler, what are the challenges that you had to go through to hold on to your ideals?
Conquering your fear, right? Because in the end, the government went after Rappler. And the first question every news head has is, do you talk to power? In general, news organizations around the world, we have a direct line. When I was heading ABS-CBN, I had a direct line to the president, because you want to make sure that you're fair, right? In this case, the idea of negotiating with the government didn't really appeal to me in any way, because we worked too hard in Rappler. Rappler is independent. This is the startup of my adult life. And if we weren't going to be independent, then it's not worth it. It's not worth working as hard, So I'd rather, so we didn't. I think that was the first, is that you don't do the easy thing. But I didn't realize how hard it was going to get, because I didn't realize that the government would go so far, and that all shattered when the government arrested me in February 2019, when they were just cases being filed. I was like, okay, they're just trying to intimidate us. We won't get intimidated. I'm too old. I've been doing this for a long time. And so we continued. When they arrested me, And they did it to make sure that I was detained overnight. They arrested me just at the court closing time of the court. That's when I realized, oh, well, now I have evidence of how this government will abuse its power in order to intimidate. I don't have to ask anyone else. It happened to me. And I came out of that night. I had stronger. I came out of that night stronger, precisely because I didn't have to ask anyone else what the government is capable of doing. And I'm lucky compared to others. I'm a high profile journalist. Is probably, I spent most of my career, nearly 2 decades, working with CNN. I set up the Manila Bureau, and then I set up the Jakarta Bureau. And so when I came back to head the largest news group in 2005, I was high profile. So the goal of the government in doing that to me was to make me an example to everyone else, so that everyone else is scared. If we can do this to her, what can we do to you? And that's exactly the kind of mafioso mentality that the government has exerted, right? Imagine if you are a journalist in the provinces walking home at night. Do you get the warnings that I've gotten? No, at least not for 19 journalists who were killed under this administration. There's one journalist, 23 years old. She's been in prison for more than a year, Frenchie May Cumpio. So this is not a surprise, but I think as time went on, it just got exhausting. And then we realized these are new normals. And that's when I just said, when I was convicted last year in a cyber libel crime, a story that was published in 2012, before the crime that we allegedly violated, before the law we violated existed, right? When that happened, I was like, we're bending the law to the point it's broken. And that's where it's the weaponization of the law, right? So first weaponization of social media, then weaponization of the law. Having said that, and then here's the other part with Dmitry, is the Philippines now Russia, right? I mean, I remember when I was still with CNN and I would visit Russia, and that kind of duality of what the facts are, how things aren't what they seem, the weaponization of, social media was like as early as 2014. It's in the Russian military doctrine. Right. I used to think this is great, that we're not Russia. Sorry, Russia. Sorry, Dmitry. It wasn't as tough, but now it is, right? So, but I think the difference is that we have a chance to regain our democracy. We've held the line, and now we're at the tail end. We're in the 5th year of a 6-year term of President Duterte, and we have elections in May next year. Right. We've carried it this far. We've survived, and now I hope that we're able to have elections next year, and Filipinos will choose well. The biggest problem, of course, is that whether we have integrity of elections will depend on whether we have integrity of facts. And with the social media platforms, that is impossible unless they change it. Right.
You did mention about, people, some journalists could have succumbed to the pressure that is put on them. And that you being arrested, for you, it was just made you a stronger person and more committed to the cause. In India, 5 years ago, there were 10.3 lakh people who were journalists. Today, it's come down to 2.3. 78% of the media employees either lost their jobs or left the industry. What do you say to that section of disillusioned journalists?
This is the disruption of our industry. So here's the biggest problem, right? The Nobel Committee said that journalists, actually, to paraphrase them, right? Freedom of expression is necessary for a democracy. The quality of the journalist of a democracy, of a country, is indicative of the quality of its democracy. The problem is that the business model of news has crumbled. And that goes hand in hand with the rise of the technology platforms, which are the very same places that is tearing down the credibility of news, of journalists, right? It's a virtuous, horrendous cycle. Part of the reason journalists have been laid off globally is because news organizations have lost their revenue stream, the advertising revenue stream. And where did they flock to? They flock to the technology platforms that have enabled the attacks against journalists. And yet, as the Nobel Committee pointed out, you need journalists to get the facts, especially in conflict areas, especially when authoritarian governments growing into dictatorships, growing into fascism, need to be curbed. If you don't have journalists doing that, and that's the difference. I go crazy when people call journalists content creators, because we're not. We are not content creators. It would be very easy to just create content. It isn't easy to be a good journalist, to stake your life at times if you're in a war zone, your reputation when you're challenging power. It isn't easy to go up to somebody who has all the power in your world and demand answers. That takes courage. And that's the commodity that no one can really pay for. That is what the mission of journalism creates. So I worry that our society, sorry, I'm hyper. I will tone it down.
No, it's perfect. I think we need voices like yours at this time. So you were talking about tech companies. So that brings me to the obvious question. How has the confrontation with Facebook influenced you as a journalist?
So I think that Pandora's box has opened. Technology will be a part of our lives. We can't go backwards. We can only go forwards. And that's also why I think more journalists have to embrace technology. And technology has to actually embrace the fact that they are now the new gatekeepers, and that they cannot treat lies the same way they treat facts. That's really where everything begins, right? The data points of lies and facts are identical. And you can actually say that the lies have preferential treatment in the algorithmic distribution, because lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and further than facts. So you can say that the world's largest distribution platforms for news are biased against facts, and they're biased against journalists. Our future, both of journalism and of these tech platforms, are intertwined. I'm crossing my fingers, because they are intertwined. We're building a tech platform now for Rappler because for our elections, we want our people to have a place where they can have fact-based, evidence-based discussions. Because it is in the listening that you get compromises, which is what a democracy is all about. It shouldn't be about who shouts loudest or who has a bigger troll army. It should certainly not be about insidious manipulation. I think the time of surveillance capitalism, where these platforms made a lot of money, that time is going to end. And I hope that they end it. They're the ones who choose to stop it, because enlightened self-interest, they can't live in a world where democracy doesn't exist anymore, right? Who would want to do that?
Right. You said that, you talked about gatekeeping, right? So you said the media has lost its gatekeeping powers to technology, that the platforms that deliver the news are biased against news. How do you take back control, and how do you regain the trust of the people in such a scenario?
The hard part for journalists is that's not within our control anymore, right? Think about it like this, right? I already said that the facts are, you in this new world, you say a lie 1,000,000 times, it's a fact. In the old world, when I was starting as a reporter, you say a lie 10 times, journalists can catch up, the facts can catch up. But when it's 1,000,000 times exponentially pounded, we don't stand a chance. So if you don't have facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust, right? This is what I mean, that it's not what the journalists do. The incentive scheme of the internet and social media don't encourage facts and journalism. that's it actually what they have encouraged, what the incentive structures have encouraged information operations. This is why it's not a surprise that your government, my government, Russian disinformation, Iranian disinformation, Saudi Arabia. I mean, I can name them. There have now been many countries. And Oxford University's Computational Propaganda Research Project said at the beginning of the year that there are at least 81 countries around the world where cheap armies on social media are rolling back democracy, meaning they are insidiously manipulating their people. In which democracy is that okay, right? I mean, there are a lot of little things that I rail against. Sorry about that. Like, for example, these tech platforms tell us, well, if you don't like it, just mute it or block. Can you imagine a journalist saying that? I'm sorry, if you don't like this fact, just like ignore it, but the rest of the world can still see it. This is why our public sphere is so broken. Because the idea behind the tech platforms is that we can each have our own realities. It's like we're living in the matrix and we're in our own illusions. That's not, this is what's tearing down democracy. It is what's tearing down, well, you go to the Nobel Peace Prize, right? You can't negotiate peace if you don't agree on the facts, if you don't agree on your shared reality. I'll shut up. I think I've had too much Coke Zero.
No, that kind of brings me to the question. So how do you deal with the cyberbullying, and the threats? What are the worst personal attacks that you have faced in your journalistic career?
I can't even quantify them anymore, but I will say that the International Center for Journalists, University of Sheffield, and UNESCO, working with Rappler, they analyzed almost 500,000 social media attacks against me.
Right.
And what they found was 60% were meant to tear down my credibility. I'm old. This is my 35th year as a journalist. And 40% were meant to tear down my spirit, right? You haven't torn down my spirit. If anything,
But how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that?
You understand the data. This is what gives me power to cut through it, because I know what they're after. I know why they're doing it. And, and like one of the attacks, for example, is, name every animal, and I've been called this. But I used to be sensitive about my dry skin because I have eczema, atopic dermatitis. And, what the propaganda machine did was to like take photos and like put deep cracks in my face. It's painful when I have that. But what they did is they took my head and put it on top of human genitals because they called me scrotum face, right? Name every single. So I used to be sensitive. I'm no longer sensitive about it. I can now talk to you about it. That's good.
Right.
So,
right.
Or maybe I'm really just an optimist and I look for the upside of it, because there is always an upside. But it's not going to work for me. I've just decided, because I know why they're doing it. Once you know the whys and then you have the what, then you can tell the story. And we expose it. That's what we do. We show you how they are insidiously manipulating.
So that would be a counter question. So in a sense, like a question to you, you mentioned about being trolled. And I don't think I can name a journalist that has been trolled as much as you and some others in the industry. But what's your message to people around the world, journalists around the world who succumb and, or who are trying to fight it out? What's your message to them?
You are not alone. You're not alone. And this is a tactic of power. And here's the part I don't like, and I worry about the future of humanity, because in a way, the types of leaders we have today give people a permission to be their worst selves. This is how these digital authoritarians came to power, using us against them. In the Philippines, women are attacked at least 10 times more than men. The kind of gains that we've had for feminists, I think that's all been rolled back. So look, you're not alone. We are going to get through this. We will demand, I continue to demand, that guardrails be put in place. And, here's the last part, right? All of these attacks on social media are also meant to create this enabling environment for government's actions. In my case, in May 2017, the government, they tried to trend hashtag arrest Maria Ressa. It didn't trend. So they waited another 2 years until they actually arrested me. It's like the harbinger of what the government wants to do. So I actually look in social media of where the government is headed, of the information operations that's coming out.
Interesting.
I think the last part is this: if you are under attack, don't be ashamed of it, because it's not about you, it's about your job. They want to sap your energy so that you stop doing your job. Don't let them.
All right, that's a very good message, Maria. So, Maria, in your speech at Harvard last year about journalism, you had said that assault on facts happening around the world has shifted journalism's role to one of advocacy. This goes against the traditional understanding of the role of journalists. Could you explain why the shift is necessary?
Yes, it's because of technology, right? And I really go back to that, because the technology that delivers our news is not neutral. It's not like the medium. You know, Marshall McLuhan said it: the medium is the message. Television could be more emotive, right? But at least we all saw the same screen. We saw the same program. We weren't being manipulated by the messages in the way social media, the internet now allows, right? And so in that sense, I feel like it's a completely different world. This social media has become this behavior modification system, and every user is Pavlov's dogs. They're A/B testing whether or not it works. And what's their goal? To keep us scrolling, even if, so there are several things that are happening there. Your biology is being used against you. It's mildly addictive. You have increased levels of dopamine, of oxytocin. And then beyond that, every point, everything you put, whether it's on any digital platform, is gathered by machine learning to create a model of you that knows you better than you know yourself. And then, takes your most vulnerable moment to a message and serves it. That's the new advertising to a corporation. And then to a government, the new propaganda is far more insidious than radio, than Joseph Goebbels was during the last time a journalist won this Nobel Prize, right? So this is a huge problem. The last thing I'll say, and I say this if you saw the Harvard, I say this everywhere, which is our biggest crisis is our Paleolithic emotions, how our biology is being manipulated. So Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. The medieval institutions have failed to regulate. They don't understand it. They're just starting to get it. And then that godlike technology is being exercised by human beings without godlike wisdom.
Right. Again, Maria, you were born in the Philippines and you were raised in New Jersey in America. How has this shaped you? Having seen the East and the West and experienced both lives, how has that shaped you as a journalist?
I'm used to being on the outside,
right.
Because when I'm in America, I feel most Filipino. When I'm in the Philippines, I feel most American. I guess you realize that there is more than one way of looking at the world, and that these kinds of judgments that a dictator or a fascist tries to do, like this us against them, that is actually the worst of leadership. Because one of the things, unity and diversity, right? A lot of different countries have it, including India, right? We need to come together. Look at coronavirus. The best leader in coronavirus unites, explains, brings out the best in human nature instead of dividing and using violence and fear. When people are afraid, it's almost like every man or every woman for himself. And that means democracy splinters and there's no pushback against this growing power. So I continue to hope that I believe in the goodness of human nature. Isn't that insane? After everything, I haven't given up, and I can see it. I know we can get through this, and I guess that's the faith I have.
Right. That also calls about mental strength, and control. Like it has a lot to do with mental strength in the way you are either built or you are in the process while being a journalist or in other professions. But you did mention that How to Stand Up to a Dictator, the book. You did go through different emotions. Can you just touch on that? The emotions that you went through, and how you overcame that, and how you think it's how you overcame that, basically.
I grew up at a time when journalists aren't the story. I spent most of my career, telling other people's stories. And we now live in a time where social media pushes out authenticity, and the journalists growing up in this generation have different incentives. What I hope stays is the standards and ethics and the mission of journalism, right? The form may change, but I hope the substance stays the same. When I was writing this book, I went back over all of that because my team in Jakarta was an experiment team. So we were given a lot of the new technology. We were one of the teams in Asia that played with whatever Atlanta was playing with. Right. So I had a Toko, which was, this was this big white box where you can transmit the video separately from the audio, but then you have to spend hours just transmitting it.
Right.
The very first Toko Vast P boxes. And then, that became the video phone, and then satellite costs went down. I grew up when my career went from dictating your story in a public payphone to going live every hour on the hour, right? And I knew the impact of technology, but I didn't really realize it until the internet. And what I worry about with the internet is that, and I'm sorry, I'm going into the substance, but it's the commoditization of news. Because when news is commoditized, when you reduce something that takes so long to do, you can take 8 months to do an investigative report that will hold power to account, because you need to be absolutely certain, because you will be sued if you're wrong by power, right? Yeah. So you spend 8 months doing this story, and here it is measured by page views. And you're going up against the latest entertainment story of the night. And here, this story that took so much time and money is devalued. Meaning is devalued, and everything is like sugar, right? I think that's wrong. And so I went through a range of emotions while I was writing, and I'm still writing. I just got my editor's notes back, and I will spend the next month doing another draft, doing my rewrite. And I know we've lived through some incredible times, but I do know that it is important that journalism survives, because what we give is not just the discipline of journalism. And I think that part of what is journalism, it's the process of the newsroom that makes sure that you have the context of the story, the context and story of the facts, right? You need that, because the thing that, and I mentioned this, what journalists bring to it that is bigger than any content creator is the courage to challenge power. And that is, we carry that from the power we get from the people. In the Philippine Constitution, it's patterned after the US. So I'm sorry, it's a long-winded answer to your question, and I should go, but really,
there's one more question.
Okay,
just
go ahead.
Quickly. So, you have written on terrorism and 2 books on terrorism. So how do you think there's going to come to a phase when there's some kind of united fight against this?
Oh, that's tough to answer. I was just thinking, you're in India, and I've done I was there for the New Delhi, the Indian Airlines hijacking in 1999.
Yes,
I was there for that. I was there for the New Delhi, the Parliament attack.
Right.
I don't know. I was there when Tony Blair came to visit because
Right.
our Delhi bureau moved into Afghanistan and Jakarta moved to New Delhi. So I lived there for months. I loved it. And at the same time, also realized, oh my God, you have so much, and there's so much that needs to be done. Sorry. So let me answer your question about, what was your question again?
So I just want to know, you've written 2 books on terrorism.
Terrorism. Yeah. Will it ever? So the Indian Airlines hijacking reminded me of that because Omar, I'm trying to remember his name, Omar Sheikh, right? Omar Sheikh, what came out of that, he was released. He gets onto the Indian Airlines plane, they hijack it, they bring it to Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, they're released. And then he comes back and he's in Pakistan. And I was in New Delhi when he called me, right around the time that the Wall Street Journal reporter, Daniel Pearl, right? Atlanta wouldn't let me go to meet him. And I later, after Daniel was kidnapped, I realized, my God, my desk saved me because I was going to go meet Omar Sheikh. Who wouldn't want to at that point, right? So it's these random things. So I look at India and terrorism, and I followed trails. Omar Sheikh was directly connected to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was probably the guy who beheaded Daniel Pearl, right? So, and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, I followed in the Philippines when he lived here in 1994. And they tested these tactics along with his nephew, Ramzi Youssef, the guy behind the first World Trade Center bomber. They tested how to get through airport security in Manila. And because we have the same machines as the United States. So anyway, the right answer is that in the past, terrorism was used as a form of asymmetrical warfare, right? And it used to be for state to state. Then it wasn't that anymore. And I think 9/11 was a big signal for how it's no longer nation to nation fighting, that these terrorist groups are asymmetrical warfare. And it comes out of a lot of things. Injustice, when a state abuses its powers. Certainly that's happened here in the Philippines, in Indonesia. But the irony of it now, so I don't think that's ever going to go away unless we have great governments who will provide for the people. And if anything, we're getting worse. But I'd say here's the last twist that connects to the asymmetrical warfare. Today, it is the government exploiting these tactics of asymmetrical warfare against its citizens, and it is doing it insidiously. Those are the 2 biggest stories of my career. The 9/11 attacks, which were a memory for me because probably the first pilot recruited by Al-Qaeda was arrested in the Philippines in 1995. And then now finding these information operations. I call them the new terrorists.
All right. So Maria, thanks so much for your time. And I wish you the very best for your fellow at Harvard Kennedy School. And just wanted to close by telling you, like, journalism needs you, democracy needs you, the world needs you. Thank you so much, Maria, for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you so much.